life, and that's why we think that we go on even after everything is shut down, because we can't imagine a world without us. It's just in the same way that we can't imagine that we are just our own mental processes. We can't see a world without us. It's just, it's always been, it always will be. When we die, something of us has to exist beyond that. We just can't.
Well, when I encounter that notion, though, when people say, well, I can't imagine not existing at some point, I say, well, you know what? Before you were born, didn't we have a world that didn't exist? Unless you're going to go to the extreme and say, no, the world started when I was born, which is very unlikely, then you're going to have to confront the fact that, there was a world without you before you were born, and you know what? The same thing could happen after you're dead. So it's a very simple deduction there.
Yeah, and for some people too, it's hard to imagine a world without family members that they were really close to or friends, to think that they're not continuing on after too. It's kind of a comfort thing, I think, too.
Oh, definitely. And you know what? I'm very sympathetic to that. Many people have kind of attachment to loved ones and so forth, where it's difficult or impossible to let go. I've been in that position myself, where it's difficult to imagine the world being without someone else. But on the other hand, at some point we have to, even in grief, recognize that the reality of the situation is the person's gone and we're not going to see that person again. And I think part of the way in which non-believers can confront death is to think of death not so much as an end to something per se, not an event to be dreaded in and of itself, but rather you look at someone's life, not at someone's death. The meaning of someone's life isn't how they died. The meaning of someone's life is how they lived. And so if someone passes on, you celebrate the life that they had. And you appreciate things that were here, and because regretting the things that aren't here is just a gloomy attitude, which is very counterproductive.
Yeah, I think that was because like within a month or so after I had my deconversion, as I call it, a friend of my wife's passed away, and both of us trying to deal with that, and I'm suddenly having to put this into a context of that person is gone. And one thing that struck me was the thought that, well, not really, because in every person's life that they've touched, there's been a lesson that's been taught, or that there's something that they've passed on, and so that person lives on in each person that they touched. And then that person will also live on because that influences their interaction with the next person. So in that sense, the person still does live on for however long it goes, just by that little, basically a butterfly effect kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, and people are hopefully fondly remembered after they're gone. And I think that's one of the goals that we should have in our own lives, is to try to influence people and touch as many lives and make them better as we can, as we go about our daily lives doing our own goals. And that's something that believers and non-believers alike should cherish.
Okay. Well, you also gave us a speech at Logicon this past November with some pretty esoteric arguments, as you called them, against the existence of God. Do you remember some of those?
Well, I'll give you a few of those. Now, my premise here is in presenting this particular type of lecture was that atheists tend to often use the same types of arguments over and over that against theism, the failures of biblical evidence, and the argument from evil, and things of that sort. So I thought, well, let me give you a few that maybe some atheists and non-believers haven't heard of. So one of my favorites, and I really, really like this argument, is one that comes to us from Ted Drange. He's a retired professor from West Virginia University, and he came up with what's known as the argument for non-belief. And the argument for non-belief is basically this. First, the background of this argument is taking the concept of God that believers, theists, typically advance, especially Christians, is that there is a being called God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, and this being wants you to believe that he exists, okay? And he wants what's best for you, okay? Well, because otherwise, if you don't believe that he exists, then, let's presume then some bad things are going to happen to you. So, if this being wants you to believe that he exists, and it's very important for him that you believe that he exists, well, if God wanted you to believe that, being all-powerful, he'd be able to get you to believe it, right? Being all-knowing, he would know whether or not you believed it and whether he needed to intervene and give you evidence for it. And so, in other words, if God wanted you to believe that he exists, you'd believe that he exists, okay? And there'd be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. God wants something. He's all-powerful, all-knowing. He'll do it. It'll get done. It will happen, right? He created a universe. He can definitely convince you of something, right?
Right.
So, if God wanted you to believe that he exists, God wants everyone to believe that he exists. Everyone would believe that he exists. But not everyone believes that he exists. Therefore, there is no such being. Now, one of the most common responses to this argument is, oh, well, you know what? God doesn't want to make you believe that he exists.
Free will.
He wants you to have free will. He wants you to have the option of whether or not you want to believe in him. Okay, fine. But to that I say, that doesn't really alter the situation in the slightest, because if God wanted you to believe through free will that he exists, he could just show up and you'd believe that he exists. Mm-hmm. Because after all, look what I just did. I showed up here at the studio, and now you believe that I exist. Right? If someone doesn't believe that I exist, I can go to their house, knock on the door, they open it, boom, they believe that I exist. And I'm not taking away anyone's free will. Okay, I've been in an auditorium full of hundreds of people, and they all believed at that time that I existed at that moment. All I had to do was show up, and I didn't take away anyone's free will. So God could do the same. God could just provide evidence by showing up. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? If I can do it, why can't God do it?
Yep.
God didn't show up, so God isn't convincing everyone that he exists. He can do it without taking away your free will. Therefore, the free will rebuttal is null and void.
Well, the only argument that I can think of that works against that, though, and it goes back to Seitan Bruggencate, who he's not a very well-known debater, but he is a presuppositionalist. He debated Matt Dillahunty a few years ago. And his rebuttal to that would be, well, you do believe in God because everybody believes in God. It's just that the atheists refuse to admit it. That's his argument.
Well, that's just false. Okay. I mean, he can pretend that everyone believes that God exists, but if everybody believed that God exists, then why would you have any churches, right? Why is he going around doing debates? If everybody already agrees with him, it's pointless.
Right.
But no, it's ridiculous to simply say everyone believes that God exists. There's plenty of people that don't. Right. And one of the more common things that people sometimes say about this matter is that, for example, in the military, that there are no atheists in foxholes, that when push comes to shove, that people will always really admit or turn to God and pray and so forth. So there was a group that organized called Atheists in Foxholes that actually are atheists in the military. And they say, no, we don't believe in God. We're atheists, and we're right here in the foxhole.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one thing. So now you've got a discussion group coming up later this week, I think on Wednesday.
Yes, that's right. Wednesday of this week, September 14th at 6:30. There's a forum called an interfaith forum at the First Christian Church here in Bentonville, Arkansas. That's 807 Southeast 14th Street. And this at 6 o'clock, actually, they have refreshments, and they'll be offering tacos, I hear, for $8 or so if you want to partake of those. And then at 6:30 to 7:30, we have a forum, and there will be representatives of different beliefs about religion there. And so we're each going to, my understanding is that we're going to take turns sort of presenting our views and so forth. And fortunately, I have an acquaintance, Peggy Hicks, who took one of my classes here at NWAC, or a couple of classes. And she saw their lineup for people, and she said, why don't we include an atheist? And she was able to get them to include me in the bunch. So I'm going to be there representing atheism. I thank Peggy. Thank you very much, Peggy, for getting me on there. And I think it's going to be very interesting. There's that's September 14th at 6:30 at the First Christian Church here in Bentonville. And then next month, on October 19th, there's going to be another event at the very same church, and it's just going to be me and the pastor, and he's going to interview me and I guess dig deeper into what makes atheists tick or something of that sort. So that should be very interesting as well.
That should be. Yeah, I always like discussions, not necessarily debates, but discussions with the more liberal theists, like the liberal Christians, because a lot of times when you talk to them, there may be just one or two steps away. They just can't take that. It seems like they just can't take that final leap a lot of times when you talk to them, because they'll say, well, yeah, I do believe in God, but I don't believe that he punishes. I don't believe in a hell necessarily. Yes, he does answer prayers, but not the I need something kind of prayers. He answers more of the I want to be closer to you kind of prayers. It's more meditation, and the more you dig into it, it seems like they're just...
It's more like a deism. Almost.
Yeah, they're almost right there on the edge.
Yeah. And I think that there are quite a few people like that in Christianity in the United States. And I think part of that has to do with our society is moving more and more towards non-belief. Those who say they do not identify with any religious tradition are the fastest growing demographic group in the United States with regard to religious belief. Right? It's called the rise of the nuns. Those who are asked, do you have religious preference? They write none. And this is something that's just going to continue. There's going to be, right now, by some estimates, depending on what poll you're looking at, the people who have no religious preference, and which includes atheists, agnostics, and so forth, they're anywhere from 15 to 20% of the population, which is enormous. Okay. Just about 10 years ago, it was only 6 or 7%. 10 years before that was only like 2 or 3. So this is a very fast-growing group. Among those 18 to 26 years old, by some estimates, they're getting close, pushing 30%. So that's enormous. Which means that, by the way, within a generation, religion is going to be in serious trouble here in the United States.
Yeah, I think it already is, and a lot of the pushback that we're seeing is kind of like those last gasps, that they're fighting tooth and claw to stay relevant. And even in the more liberal churches, the only reason that they've become so liberal is because it's the only way that they can hang on, it seems like, in a lot of cases. Right. And
by the way, are you familiar with Bishop Shelby Spong?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually,
Bishop.
his book, it was Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism, I think, was one of the first Christian books that I had read that talked about Christianity in a way that wasn't a fundamentalist kind of take.
Yeah, he was here in Fayetteville just a few years ago. I went and I had a little talk with him, and he was presenting a number of lectures at the St. Paul's Episcopal over in Fayetteville. And he's one of those that, well, first of all, he's not a theist. He's sort of beyond theism. He has a very general kind of understanding of God that doesn't have God as a person and so forth. And I talked to not only to him, but I talked to some of the people there in the church that were attending his lectures and so forth. And they were convinced that, most Christians agree with us and so forth. And I said, well, that's very optimistic, but no, that's not the majority of Christian believers in the U.S. It would be nice if it were, because they're pretty much deists, of some sort, maybe even pantheists in some sense.
Or as Marcus Borg would call it, a panentheist, is I think the term that he coined.
Yeah. It's getting very technical, but you're right.
Yeah.
And by the way, Borg was there at St. Paul's also. I went and talked to him at one point. And they're very well-meaning. They are restructuring Christianity so that perhaps in some forms Christianity can survive this upheaval in society here in the U.S. And in fact, one of Shelby Spong's other works is called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. That was his 1998 book. And basically his argument is, look, our society has changed.